I know it's been over a few weeks, but I cannot stop thinking about Andor, specifically the character of Luthen, because I think Luthen Rael proves that even the most broken versions of ourselves have something to offer the cause. And here's the interesting thing, like Luthen is not a traditional hero. In fact, I think his own complicated relationship in terms of the founding of the rebellion, I think it's really a story of agency, and we found that out in one episode in season 2 of Andor. I want to talk about the season 2 episode, Make It Stop. So this is the scene where we see Luthen in a flashback where we see that he's actually an NCO, a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer in the Imperial Army, and he's essentially catching himself in a brief moment where he's overwhelmed by the horrors of what the Empire is doing.
Stop, Russian lose, make it stop.
And he cannot square that. He literally runs away, he hides. He just wants the violence to end. He wants to make it stop. Because like it or not, he finds himself involved. We don't know the full story of how or why, but he finds himself involved in essentially a civilian massacre. And it's interesting because in Star Wars, there's always the tropes, the hero's journey, the call to action. And Luthen does experience that call to action. It's just in the form of a poor, terrified girl hiding and essentially pleading for her life. And the moment that he chooses not to turn her in, but in fact to protect the young Kleyla, that one choice, that moment, that is his call to action. And this is Geeky Stoics, so I think this really does tie into some elements of Stoic philosophy. Specifically, I mean, there's a lot of things we can't control about the world around us. Luthen had no role to play in the vastness of an evil empire committing genocidal acts. Like, that is so far beyond the scope of this terrified NCO who's in over his head. We don't know the choices that have led him to this point, but he still has a choice. More on that in a minute. Stoicism talks a lot about making the choices that you can make so that you can influence the areas that you can influence. And that's what Luthen does in this moment. He chooses the harder but right and righteous path. And instead of ignoring her or turning her in, he chooses to save Kleyla. And that is the moment that changes his path forever. This shows that Luthen is so overwhelmed, the fact that he isn't desensitized to the violence around him. I think that shows that there's this element of a moral compass that survived in him that obviously hasn't survived in his fellow soldiers, who are still thinking in terms of like accomplishing the mission no matter the cost, and they're ignoring the very real war crimes they're committing.
Any burners you got? He wants that whole street out there on fire.
Luthen's conscience, because that's what we're talking about, it's something that drives him mad, and that's him chanting, muttering to himself, even in an alien language and in English.
Russian lose, make it stop.
Like, that tells you that he has that conscience, that he still has some element of his moral compass that's intact enough to tell him that he needs to make this choice to save Kleyla, and that's the moment. This is right out of Stoic philosophy. There's a quote by Marcus Aurelius that I think perfectly encapsulates this. If someone is able to show me what I think or do is right or wrong, I will happily change. For I seek the truth, by which no one was ever harmed. It is the person who continues in his self-deception and his ignorance who is harmed. To get to the point that the Empire has to crush all those who resist, no matter the cost, in the almighty name of peace and justice and order, like, that requires a level of self-deception. And that's a self-deception that Luthen Rael is no longer willing to accept. And here's the thing, redemption is found in action, not perfection, and that's the complicated thing about Luthen, because Luthen really does, like, he's a complicated character who does many questionable things in support of the cause. He's sort of accepted the fact that he's the one who has to do the dirty work. So it's also not like it's not a perfect allegory, or certainly he's not a perfect representative of this, because while there was the red line he would not cross when he was a member of the Empire, he crossed plenty of lines in support of the rebellion, and that's what makes him such a complicated character. But Luthen finds redemption by taking action, by not being passive, and he could have just run away, right, and escaped the Empire, but no, he wanted to and really start the foundation of the cause. It's almost like Luthen knows he can never fully atone for his past. You know, he has this dark past, but he doesn't let that stop him from trying to make a difference for the good in the end.
The rebellion isn't here anymore. It's flown away. It's everywhere now.
Like, there's that famous speech from season 1 where he indicates that he's willing to sacrifice everything. And in the end, it's exactly what he does. And here's the other thing about Luthen that I wanted to talk about, and that's his relationship with Kleyla, because it's complicated. And even in some of the behind the scenes interviews, the creators talked about this complicated, almost adversarial at times relationship between the two.
Because for it to become that, it would mean that Kleyla forgives him for having done that to her family. There are parts of Kleyla that really hate this man.
And so it's understandable that that relationship is complicated. I actually personally took it more as, I think, a beautiful story, that a beautiful part of Luthen's redemption story is him essentially becoming this adoptive father figure. It's interesting that some of the creators specifically didn't like that language of a father-daughter relationship. And I think that's the important distinction, is that it's an adoptive relationship. It's not perfect. Luthen as a father figure is not embracing Kleyla into any semblance of a normal life. Like, building the foundations of a rebellion is going to be fraught with fear, violence. Like, it is not a traditional father-daughter relationship, but I do think it's really important to recognize how much he came to care for her and how much she came to care for him, despite his own brokenness and his own history. And I think this is important for us to recognize, because again, this is Geeky Stoics. We like to think about this philosophy and how it actually affects us. And the way I think about this episode is that it just proves that you don't have to have it all together. You don't have to have it all figured out to make a difference. If there's a cause that you believe in, if there's values that you have, those are worth defending, even if you don't have the final end game in mind. And then finally, the last piece I wanted to talk about for Luthen, and that is the contrast between him and Saw Gerrera, because it's easy to lump the two together as both just extremists who go too far. But there's a really important distinction. Saw Gerrera becomes fully radicalized. Like, his rebellion is defined by his hatred of the Empire, which is justified, but he just becomes obsessed with the destruction of the Empire immediately, like whatever damage he can do, with no thought to a long-term coalition, which is what's going to be required to actually defeat the Empire. And that's sort of the irony, because like, even by the time we get to Rogue One, his disruptive operations targeting the Empire are really kind of small potatoes compared to the ultimate threat, which we know is on the horizon, literally on the horizon, and that's the Death Star. Luthen's seen the horrors, but he also understands the importance of patience, of actually biding his time so that he can be a part of building a coalition in the end. And even though he's ostracized the foundation that he lays, he's really the one who brings Andor and Mon Mothma and eventually Bail Organa and like a lot of the founding figures of the rebellion. He's the cornerstone that the rebellion is built on. And it just comes back to the whole idea of anger. Like, we've done whole videos on this channel about anger. Is it fuel or is it fire that's going to burn you? And my thoughts are pretty clear. Like, I think that Luthen proves that discipline is by far the greater virtue than righteous anger. Because Saw Gerrera had plenty of righteous anger, but in the end, he's crushed under a pile of rocks with only the faint hope that Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor would save the rebellion. Save the dream!
Remember this moment!
And so, Luthen Rael, did he redeem himself? I mean, I think the clear answer is yes. His death was tragic, but it was personal. And that moment between Kleyla, the single tear as she has to say goodbye, so that his final ultimate sacrifice would be made in service of the cause that he believed in all these years. It's beautiful. It goes all the way back to, like, he was a nobody. He was some sergeant fighting on some planet who just saw the horrors and wasn't willing to go along with it. And that's what makes him a different kind of hero, but a hero nonetheless. His legacy is that he did have a choice. And that's what Kleyla showed him. That was the most beautiful moment of this entire episode, is when he literally tells Kleyla and kind of tells you as the audience that,
I need to know you're making a choice. I lived most of my life without ever realizing that that was a possibility.
that's really powerful. And that's not just powerful in the story. It's a powerful element of philosophy that we should embrace ourselves. Because we all face tough choices. But that's the thing. When you're faced with a tough choice, you gotta make the choice. Hey, thanks for watching. Hey, if you're still hanging out with me at the end of the video, yeah, this is a little bit of a different setup. I'm literally stranded in a hotel here in Atlanta recording some videos because Steven and I were going to be at Comic-Con tabling together and my flight got canceled. So you know what? Why not? Get some videos done. Stay tuned though. Geeky Stoics will be tabling at a number of conventions over the summer. So if you want to stay up to date on everything that's going on with us and join the community, I want to really encourage you to join our Substack newsletter. It's the first link in the description below. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.